a cinematic fiction created entirely for entertainment purposes. All characters, events, and organizations are fictional. She was the most powerful woman in the room. He was the man nobody saw. One accidental touch, fingers brushing against a crooked tie, and the entire company started talking. He had nothing she needed. She had everything he couldn't afford. But sometimes the most inconvenient person walks into your life at exactly the right moment, and no contract in the world can stop what happens next. If this story finds you tonight, drop a like and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because this one's going to surprise you. The tie was crooked. Ethan Mercer noticed it in the elevator reflection at 8:47 on a Tuesday morning. That familiar, slightly defeated version of himself staring back from the scratched steel doors. Gray shirt, discount store slacks with a faint crease in the wrong place, and the tie his son had picked out for him 3 Christmases ago, navy blue with small white dots, now sitting about 15 degrees off center from where it was supposed to be. He reached up to fix it. The elevator lurched. His hand knocked it worse. He gave up and watched the floor numbers climb. He was late for a briefing on the 14th floor that he hadn't been specifically invited to. His supervisor, Derek Paulson, had forwarded the meeting request to the entire administrative team with a note that said attendance optional unless you're behind on the Q3 binders. And Ethan was not behind on the Q3 binders because Ethan was never behind on anything. Staying caught up was the only card he had. Vantage Solutions occupied the top 7 floors of a 42-story building in the financial district, and Ethan worked on the 14th, which was technically not even the good part of Vantage Solutions. He processed documentation. He cross-referenced filing systems that the software was supposed to handle automatically but didn't, because whoever had configured the software in 2019 had made a small but consequential error that nobody had fixed because fixing it would require admitting it was broken. Ethan had noticed the error 8 months ago. He had written it up. He had submitted it to his supervisor. Derek had said, "Good catch," and then nothing had happened. Ethan had submitted it again. Derek had said, "I'll escalate that," and then nothing had happened again. This was the texture of Ethan's professional life. Good catches that went nowhere, escalations that didn't. He found a seat in the back of the briefing room near the door, next to a woman named Carol from compliance who smelled like the good kind of coffee and always seemed mildly embarrassed to be wherever she was. The room was about 2/3 full, mostly mid-level managers and department leads, everyone arranged in that specific corporate formation where the people closest to the front were the ones most anxious to be seen and the people closest to the back were the ones most anxious to leave. The briefing was about the Whitmore acquisition. Ethan had heard the name floating around, Whitmore Group, some kind of logistics and distribution firm that Vantage had been circling for the better part of a year. The deal, according to the presentation being clicked through by a VP named Harrison, who spoke exclusively in bullet points, was in its final stages. There would be integration teams. There would be restructuring. There would be, Harrison said, with the specific enthusiasm of a man who had never restructured anything himself, exciting opportunities at every level of the organization. Ethan wrote the words "exciting opportunities" in his notebook and drew a small square around them. He was doodling a second square inside the first when the door opened. The room changed before he fully understood why. It was subtle, a slight straightening of spines, a reorientation of attention, the way people in a room adjust without discussing it when something important has entered the space. Ethan looked up. Sophia Lancaster walked in like she'd been walking into rooms like this her entire life, which she had. She was 30 years old and had been CEO of Vantage Solutions for 2 years, having taken over from her father under circumstances that the company's official history described as a natural leadership transition, and that everyone who'd actually been there described as considerably more complicated than that. She was dressed simply by her standards, charcoal blazer, cream blouse, her dark hair pulled back in a way that looked effortless and had probably taken 20 minutes. She had the kind of face that made you want to figure out what she was thinking, not because it was unreadable, but because the few expressions that moved across it seemed to mean something specific. She didn't apologize for interrupting. She nodded at Harrison, who immediately stopped talking and moved to the side of the room to observe rather than present, which was apparently the plan all along. Ethan had never seen her this close before. He'd seen her on the company intranet, in press photos, once from about 40 feet away in the lobby. Up close, she looked younger than the photos suggested and also somehow more serious. The briefing resumed. Ethan stopped doodling. He was paying genuine attention. There was something in the restructuring timeline that seemed to affect the document processing workflow. And if it did, someone on the 14th floor was going to need to catch that before it created a backlog, when it happened. She was moving along the side of the room, toward the door, pausing to look at something on her phone. He was leaning forward slightly, reaching for the printed slide deck he'd let slip off his knee. Their paths didn't cross so much as briefly, accidentally converge in the narrow space between the last row of chairs and the wall. She stopped. He straightened up quickly. For a half second, they were approximately 18 inches apart, and he was acutely aware of his crooked tie. Sophia Lancaster looked at it too. It was a reflex, he would decide later. The kind of thing you do without thinking, the way you reach out to steady something that's falling. Her hand came up, fingers catching the narrow end of his tie, and in 3 practiced movements she straightened it, centered it, smoothed it once against his chest. Then she looked up, apparently only then registering that she was adjusting the tie of a man she had never met in her life. "Sorry," she said. It came out flat and distracted. "It was bothering me." "It was bothering me too," Ethan said, because it was the first thing his brain produced. Something almost moved across her face. Not quite a smile, not quite surprise. She looked at him for one more second, like she was trying to place him, and then her phone buzzed and she glanced down at it and walked out of the room. The door closed. Carol from compliance was looking at him. Ethan looked back at her. "Did that just—" Carol started. "I don't know," Ethan said. By lunch, people were talking about it. He didn't understand how. The briefing room had held maybe 30 people, most of whom were focused on Harrison's slides. But the version that circulated through the cafeteria by noon bore almost no resemblance to what had actually occurred. In the cafeteria version, Sophia Lancaster had walked up to him specifically. She had straightened his tie and smiled. Someone said she had said something personal to him. Someone else said Ethan had said something that made her laugh. By 2 o'clock, a version existed in which they had stepped outside the briefing room together. Ethan heard each iteration with the specific horror of watching a small fire become a house fire. "I need you to understand," he said to his co-worker Marcus, who had been relaying these accounts with what Ethan felt was insufficient alarm, "that none of that happened. She fixed my tie because it was crooked. She apologized for it. That was the entire interaction." "Right," Marcus said. "That's it. Beginning, middle, end, 45 seconds, maybe." "Sure." Marcus stirred his soup. "But you talked to her." "I said 4 words. 5, actually. You said, 'It was bothering me too.' That's 5. That's not the point, Marcus." "The point," Marcus said patiently, "is that most people in this building have never been in the same elevator as Sophia Lancaster without staring at the wall. You had an actual verbal exchange with the woman. People are going to talk about that." "People need to stop talking about that." "People," Marcus said, "are going to talk about it for at least a week, maybe more, depending on what else happens." Nothing else was supposed to happen. Ethan went back to his desk and spent the rest of the afternoon trying to concentrate on a filing discrepancy in the Whitmore pre-acquisition documentation that nobody had noticed yet. The discrepancy was small, but the kind of small that became large if it wasn't addressed before the legal team started building the compliance framework around it. He wrote it up carefully, sent it to Derek, received no response, and went to pick up his son. Liam was 8 years old and had a gap between his front teeth and an extremely specific and deeply held theory that every movie would be better if the main character had a dog. He had held this theory since he was 5, when Ethan had taken him to see an animated film about a boy who befriended a dragon, and Liam had sat through the entire thing and then said very seriously, "It would have been better with a dog." Ethan had thought about that sentence more than was probably reasonable in the years since. He picked Liam up from the after-school program at 5:20, which was the latest pickup slot available and cost $12 more per week than the 4:45 slot, which Ethan could not make because of the commute. Liam came out with a painting that was, as best Ethan could determine, a horse. Is that a horse? Ethan asked. It's a dragon, Liam said. Of course it is. Ethan took the painting carefully. It's a very good dragon. It has wings, you just can't see them. Invisible wings. They're not invisible, they're behind it. They took the bus home because the car needed a brake job that Ethan had been putting off for 6 weeks, and the bus route was only a little inconvenient. Liam sat by the window and narrated the things he saw outside with the easy confidence of a kid who found everything worth commenting on. A dog walking a man, he said, not a man walking a dog, because clearly the dog was the one choosing the direction. A truck with a picture of a sandwich on it that was the biggest sandwich he had ever seen. A woman wearing a hat that looked like a bird, actually literally like a bird. Did Dad see that? Ethan saw the hat. He confirmed it looked like a bird. He did not mention the briefing room or the tie or Sophia Lancaster, because Liam was 8 and wouldn't have had context for any of it, and also because there was nothing to say. A woman had straightened his tie. That was all. Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had working heat in the winter and a landlord who responded to maintenance requests within 2 weeks, which Ethan had come to understand was actually quite good. It was 2 bedrooms, which they managed because Liam was small, and his room was full of things Ethan had built from flat-pack furniture kits on weekend afternoons. A low bookshelf, a toy organizer, a bed with a little wooden headboard that had taken 4 hours and 2 broken instructions to assemble, and that Ethan was quietly proud of. He made pasta because it was a Tuesday, and Tuesday was a pasta night, a structure they had arrived at by accident and maintained because structure was useful. Liam set the table badly, putting the fork on the wrong side, and Ethan said nothing because the fork was on the table, and that was what mattered. They ate, and Liam told him about a disagreement at school that had involved a kickball and some disputed rules, explaining the situation with the thorough outrage of someone who had been very clearly wronged. "What did the teacher say?" Ethan asked. "She said we should talk it out." "Did you?" "I told Marcus, the one in my class, not yours. I told him that the rules are the rules." "And?" "He said I was too serious about kickball." Ethan looked at his son. "Are you too serious about kickball?" Liam considered this genuinely. "Maybe," he admitted, "but the rules are still the rules." "Fair point," Ethan said. After dinner, Ethan helped with a worksheet on multiplication, which Liam was working through with dedicated frustration. He got the 7s mostly right and the 8s mostly wrong. They drilled the 8s. Liam got better at them. Ethan told him this. Liam said he still didn't see why you needed to know 8 times 7 when you had a calculator in your pocket. Ethan could not fully argue with this and settled for saying that knowing it made the calculator faster to check. Liam accepted this without enthusiasm. He read for 40 minutes after. They were in the middle of a chapter book about a kid who discovered a strange object in his backyard, and Ethan read aloud in the slightly ridiculous voices that had become expected, and that he would have been embarrassed to explain to another adult. Liam fell asleep before the chapter ended, which happened most nights, his breathing evening out while Ethan was mid-sentence. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed for a while after, looking at his son the way he did sometimes, taking stock of the fact of him, the weight of him sleeping, the specific and reliable way he always kicked one foot out from under the blanket no matter how cold the room was. There were nights when Ethan felt the edges of something that he could only describe as tiredness, not the kind that sleep fixed. And this was one of those nights. The rumors at the office, the brake job he was putting off, the school program fees going up in January, the email from the administration sitting in his inbox with the new rate bolded in a cheerful font as if the number were good news. He tucked the loose foot back under the blanket. It came back out immediately in sleep, a reflex, a habit. He left it. In the morning, his supervisor Derek stopped by his desk before he'd finished his coffee, which was a development Ethan had learned to interpret as a warning sign. "Got a weird one," Derek said, leaning against the partition in the way that meant he was uncertain how to frame something. "Okay. HR reached out. Apparently they've been fielding calls about you." Ethan set down his coffee. "About the tie thing." "What tie thing?" "I was going to say about the Whitmore discrepancy you flagged." "Oh." Ethan recalibrated. "What did HR say?" "Nothing bad. Someone in legal apparently saw your write-up and forwarded it up the chain. The discrepancy is real, and if it had gone unaddressed, it would have been a mess in about 3 weeks. You're being asked to join the documentation review working group. Derek looked mildly affronted, as if someone had taken something of his. It's a compliment, he added, in the tone of a man for whom compliments that went to other people were difficult. Okay, Ethan said. The working group meets on the 15th floor. Ethan registered that information. The 15th floor was within the main Vantage executive zone. It was, as office geography went, a considerable distance from where he currently sat. Sure, he said. When do I start? Thursday. Derek paused. Is there a tie thing? Ethan picked up his coffee. No, he said. Never mind. Except there was, and by Thursday it was worse than it had been on Tuesday. He walked into the 15th floor working group meeting to find 2 members of the team already looking at him differently. The specific look of people who have heard something about you and are now calibrating whether the story matches the reality. The working group lead, a meticulous woman named Patricia who spoke in complete paragraphs, introduced him briskly to the 4 other members, named their roles, and moved immediately into the agenda. Professional. Efficient. Ethan was grateful for it. He contributed carefully. The discrepancy he'd flagged was more layered than his initial write-up had covered, and as they walked through it, he found himself drawing connections that the others had missed. Not because he was smarter, but because he'd spent months watching the documentation system from the 14th floor and knew which gaps the software left unfilled. Patricia noticed. She asked follow-up questions. He answered them. By the time the meeting ended, 2 things had happened simultaneously. He had begun to establish actual credibility with the working group, and a message had appeared in his company email from an address he'd never received mail from before. Ethan Mercer. My assistant has put time on your calendar for Thursday at 4 p.m. Please come to the 38th floor. S. Lancaster. He read it 3 times. He looked around his desk as if the room might offer some guidance. He typed, I'll be there. E. Mercer. He deleted E. Mercer, then put it back in, then deleted it again, and sent the message without a signature. The 38th floor was different in the way that all power is different from regular life. Not louder, actually quieter, the carpet thicker, the lighting more deliberate, the air itself seeming to move more slowly. Her assistant, a composed man named Daniel, who gave the impression of having handled considerably stranger situations than this one, walked Ethan to a corner office that looked out over the city in a way that made the city look like a carefully arranged display. Sophia Lancaster was standing at the window when he came in. She turned around when she heard him, and for a moment she just looked at him the way she had in the briefing room. That trying to place you look, except this time she clearly had placed him and was deciding something else. Sit down, she said. He sat. She didn't, which put him at a slight disadvantage and which he suspected was not entirely accidental. I assume you know why you're here, she said. The rumors, Ethan said. The rumors, she confirmed, which are, to be clear, idiotic and entirely the result of a completely ordinary moment that I handle about twice a week in private without anyone apparently noticing. You fix people's ties twice a week? She looked at him. I straighten things that are crooked. It's a reflex. I've been doing it since I was a child. A pause. I'm explaining this so you understand the situation you're now in is not one I intended to create for you. I didn't think you intended it. What did you think? I thought it was an accident. It was. She crossed her arms and looked out the window briefly, then back at him. The problem is that accidents in this building don't stay accidents. They become stories. And stories, once they start, are hard to manage. Ethan looked at her steadily. What kind of managing are we talking about? She paused. Before I answer that, how's your son? He blinked. Sorry? Your son, 8 years old. You pick him up from after-school care. She must have registered something on his face because she added quickly, I have an HR profile. I looked at your file after the working group came up. I wasn't surveilling you. I wanted to know who I'd inadvertently made the subject of company gossip. Ethan absorbed this. He's fine, he said carefully. He's great, actually. Why does that matter? It matters, Sophia said slowly, because what I'm about to propose involves disrupting your life. and I needed to understand what that life looked like. The quiet in the room was the kind that happens right before something changes. "I'd like to offer you a contract," she said. 6 months. You act as my partner. Public events, company functions, a few family appearances. In exchange, I solve whatever problem you're currently not talking about." Ethan's voice came out flat. "I'm sorry. You want me to pretend to be your boyfriend. I want you to publicly be someone I chose instead of someone that was chosen for me. There's a difference." "That seems like a pretty fine distinction." "Most important distinctions are fine." She finally sat down, across from him, and for the first time in the conversation, she looked like someone who was uncertain rather than someone who was managing uncertainty. It made her look younger and also more real. "I have a board that wants a merger that requires me to be attached to someone specific. I have a family that agrees with the board. I have shareholders who think my personal life is a valid business concern. And I have a situation with you right now that is going to cause you professional problems unless something redirects the story. And you think this redirects it. I think this replaces it with a story that works for both of us." Ethan leaned back in the chair. He thought about the brake job. He thought about the school program increase. He thought about the look on Liam's face when Ethan had told him carefully and gently that this year they'd do a smaller Christmas. And Liam had said okay with the specific equanimity of a child who had learned not to ask for things that weren't available. "This is the strangest conversation I've had in my professional life," he said. "I imagine so. I'd need to think about it, obviously. And I'd have conditions." She looked at him steadily. "I'd expect so." He looked at his hands, then back at her. "What makes you think I won't just talk? Tell someone what this actually is?" Sophia Lancaster looked at him for a long moment. "Because," she said, "you spent 8 months quietly flagging a software error that nobody wanted to fix, submitting it again when it was ignored, and then flagging a merger discrepancy that you could have said nothing about and nobody would have known. You don't seem like someone who talks." The accuracy of that landed quietly. "I'll think about it," he said again. "You have until Friday," she said. "After that, the story keeps writing itself." He stood up. She stood too, and they were standing approximately the same distance apart as they had been in the briefing room on Tuesday, and neither of them moved to close it or increase it. The city spread behind her through the glass. "For the record," he said, "the tie really was bothering me too." Something moved across her face this time. Not quite a smile, but the precursor to one, the shape of what a smile would look like if it allowed itself to happen. "I know," she said. "You have good taste in them. The pattern's nice." He walked out. In the elevator going down, he thought about Liam's face when he'd said okay about the smaller Christmas. He thought about Derek's expression when someone else got a compliment. He thought about a software error that had been sitting broken for years because fixing it required admitting it was broken in the first place. He thought about a woman who had looked at a crooked tie and reached out to fix it without asking permission, and the 45 seconds that followed, and how 45 seconds could apparently become a problem that reached the 38th floor. He pulled out his phone. He texted Marcus. "I need to talk to you about something, but not here." Marcus replied in 40 seconds. "Is this about the tie?" Ethan put his phone in his pocket. In the lobby, he walked past the spot where it had started. The elevator bank. The scratched steel doors. He looked at his reflection. Gray shirt, discount slacks, navy tie with the white dots, perfectly centered now, the way it had been since Tuesday. Because after someone takes the trouble to fix a thing, you stop letting it go crooked. He pushed through the revolving door and walked out into the city, thinking about Friday, thinking about 6 months, thinking about what he was worth and what he owed and what a man could reasonably ask of a situation he had not chosen and could not entirely walk away from. Above him, 38 floors up, the corner office light was still on. He didn't look up, but he knew it was there. He told Marcus on Friday morning, sitting at a corner table in the coffee place 2 blocks from the office that was slightly too expensive for their salaries, and that they went to anyway because the alternative was the machine on 12 that produced something technically classified as coffee, but that tasted like regret. Marcus listened without interrupting, which was unusual for Marcus. He sat with his cup held in both hands and his expression cycling through several things in sequence. surprise, then skepticism, then something that looked uncomfortably close to excitement. Say something, Ethan said. I'm processing. You've been processing for 4 minutes. This is a lot to process. Marcus set down his cup. She offered you money, to be your boyfriend, in public. A contract, it's more formal than that. Ethan, that is the same thing with extra steps. It's a business arrangement. It is a very unusual business arrangement. Marcus leaned forward. How much money? Ethan told him. Marcus sat back. He picked up his cup, put it down again. That's enough to fix the car, cover the school fees, maybe start an actual savings account for Liam instead of the envelope in my sock drawer. Marcus was quiet for a moment. You're going to say yes. I haven't decided. You've decided. You wouldn't have told me unless you'd decided. You don't tell people things you haven't decided about. Ethan looked at his coffee. Marcus was not wrong about this. It feels wrong, Ethan said. The whole setup. Because of Liam. Because of all of it. Because I don't know how to be in those rooms. Corporate galas and investor dinners. I barely know how to tie a tie properly, Marcus. That's literally the inciting incident of this entire situation. She fixed the tie. That's not a reassuring point. I think it's a little reassuring. Marcus considered. Here's what I think. I think you've been doing everything correctly for a long time and getting approximately nowhere. I think your son deserves things you currently can't give him. And I think the worst realistic outcome here is that you spend 6 months attending expensive events with a powerful woman who apparently noticed you were competent before she noticed anything else. He shrugged. There are worse problems. Ethan sat with that for a long moment. I need conditions, he said. Obviously. Real ones. In writing. Also obviously. Marcus finished his coffee. Are you going to tell her about Liam? I mean, really tell her? She already knows about him. Knowing someone has a kid and knowing what that actually means are different things. Ethan thought about the envelope in his sock drawer and what was in it. Not enough. Never quite enough. I know, he said. I'll figure it out. He sent the message to Sophia's assistant at 11:47 that morning. 3 words. I have conditions. She replied herself, not through Daniel. Meet me at 1. The conditions were not complicated, but stating them out loud across a desk from the CEO of the company he worked for required a particular kind of steadiness that Ethan had to locate before he walked into the room. He laid them out plainly. He would not lie to his son. Liam would be told something age-appropriate but not false. He would maintain his actual position at Vantage, working group included, without special treatment that could be removed when the arrangement ended. The contract would be in writing, reviewed by someone he trusted, before he signed anything. And the arrangement ended cleanly in 6 months. No extensions, no renegotiations, no ambiguity. Sophia sat across from him and listened to each one without interrupting. The Liam condition, she said when he finished. That's the one that matters to you. They all matter to me. But that's the one you'd walk over. He didn't answer that. She seemed to take his silence as confirmation, which it was. Fine, she said. All 4. I'll have legal draw up a draft by Monday. I want to have someone look at it before I sign. I'd expect that. She paused. Who? A friend who's a paralegal. That enough? That's enough. She stood, extending her hand across the desk. We have a deal, then. He stood and shook it. Her grip was firm and brief, professional. Nothing about it was strange. Everything about the situation was strange. One thing, she said as he was moving toward the door, when we're in public, you don't have to perform. I'm not asking for a performance. He turned. What are you asking for? She seemed to consider the question genuinely, like it hadn't occurred to her before this moment. Just don't be embarrassed of me, she said finally. And I won't be embarrassed of you. It was an odd thing to say, and he could tell from her face that she knew it, but he also understood exactly what she meant, and that understanding sat in an uncomfortable place in his chest as he rode the elevator back down to the 14th floor. The contract arrived Monday. His friend Jess, who was a paralegal for a firm downtown and had opinions about everything including contract language, called him after reading it. It's real, she said. Like, an actual attorney drafted this. She has actual attorneys. The terms are weirdly fair, like almost suspiciously fair. There are no gotcha clauses. You looked for gotcha clauses? I always look for gotcha clauses. A pause. Sign it, Ethan. Get the car fixed. Put some money away for your kid. He signed it that Wednesday. She co-signed it that Thursday. Daniel couriered the copies. The arrangement began. The first event was a charity auction at the Hargrove Hotel, 11 days into the contract, on a Thursday evening that Ethan spent approximately 40 minutes worrying about which version of himself to bring. He wore the suit he'd bought 2 years ago for a job interview. Charcoal gray, still good, a little snug in the shoulders now because he'd been doing pull-ups in the apartment hallway because the gym membership he'd canceled was $40 a month he'd needed for something else. The navy tie with the white dots. Liam, informed that Ethan had a work event with someone important, had looked at the tie with the authority of a person who picked it out personally and said that one, definitely, and Ethan had gone with the kid's judgment. Sophia met him in the hotel lobby. She was wearing a dark green dress that made her look like she'd been born in rooms like this, which in some ways she had. She looked at the tie and something crossed her face briefly. "Liam picked that?" she asked. Ethan stopped. "How did you—" "Lucky guess." She started toward the event doors. "Come on, I'll tell you who matters in this room and who thinks they do." This turned out to be genuinely useful. She narrated the room in a low voice as they moved through it. "That man is the managing partner of Vantage's largest outside counsel. He likes talking about his sailboat and will respect you more if you ask a second question. That woman controls 3 of the pension funds that are in our top 10 shareholders. She's heard every polished answer imaginable and responds better to honest ones. Those 2 over there are from the financial press and will quote anything that sounds like a story. Don't say anything to them that you wouldn't want attributed to you in a headline." "You do this all the time," Ethan said between the sailboat man and the pension fund woman. "Every week, basically." "Don't you get tired of it?" She glanced at him sideways. "Yes," she said, in a tone that suggested the admission was not one she made often. "But you don't really have the option of being tired in these rooms. You show up tired and they write about whether you're losing your edge. Who decides what your edge looks like? Everyone except me, apparently." An older man in a tuxedo intercepted them before she could say more, embracing her with the familiarity of someone who had known her when she was a child. He was introduced as Gerald Whitfield, which meant nothing to Ethan, but the way Sophia's posture changed infinitesimally, a slight stiffening, quickly corrected, told him that Whitfield was someone she had to be careful around. Gerald looked at Ethan with the specific appraisal of someone who found unexpected things in rooms they thought they knew. "And who's this?" he asked. "Ethan Mercer," Sophia said, and she put her hand on Ethan's arm when she said it, which was the first time there had been any physical component to the arrangement, and which surprised him enough that he kept his face deliberately still. "He works with me." "Works with you," Gerald repeated, making the phrase do several things at once. He shook Ethan's hand. "What do you do, Ethan?" "Documentation review," Ethan said. "Working group on the Whitmore acquisition." Gerald looked at Sophia. "Smart man to have in the room." "I think so," Sophia said. Gerald moved on, pulled into another conversation by someone who wanted something from him. Sophia's hand dropped from Ethan's arm. They stood for a moment in the small aftermath of that exchange. "He's on the board," Sophia said quietly. "He's been pushing the merger that requires me to marry someone I have no interest in marrying." "The Adrian Sterling thing." She looked at him. "You know about that." "It's a large company, not a secret." She was quiet for a moment, watching Gerald across the room. "He's not a bad person," she said, and the fairness of it seemed to cost her something. "He genuinely believes it's the right business decision. He's just not considering that a business decision and a life decision are different things." Ethan thought about that. He thought about the other decisions he'd made that looked like one thing and were actually another. Staying in the apartment they could barely afford because Liam's school was 3 blocks away. Keeping the bad car running because a different car would mean a different route and different hours. Every small choice that looked like failure from the outside and felt like deliberate love from the inside. "What do you want?" he asked her. "I mean, actually, not what you want the company to look like or what you want the board to think. What do you want?" She was quiet for long enough that he thought she might not answer. "Dinner," she said finally. "I want a real dinner somewhere nobody's watching, with a person who talks to me like I'm a person and not a title." "That's not a big thing," Ethan said. "No," she said, "it isn't." She looked at him. "And somehow it's the thing I least often get." A waiter passed with a tray. She took a glass. He took a glass. They stood in the middle of the Hargrove Hotel, surrounded by the upper register of the city's financial class, and they looked at each other with the particular awkwardness of two people who have just been more honest than they planned to be. "Tell me something about Liam," she said. "That's a shift." "Humor me." Ethan took a sip of whatever was in his glass. Good champagne, better than anything in his apartment. "Last week, he told me that every movie would be better with a dog in it. This has been his position for 3 years. Is he right?" "I've been thinking about it, and I'm not sure he's wrong." She laughed. Not the polished social laugh she'd been producing at intervals around the room. Something shorter and more genuine, catching her slightly off guard. She pressed her fingers against her lips as if trying to contain it and didn't quite manage. "What's he like?" she asked when she'd recovered. "Stubborn," Ethan said without hesitation. "Funny. Incredibly fair-minded. He will argue a rule he doesn't like as long as the rule is the rule. He kicked better than anyone on his team last season and still insisted they rotate goalie duty because, quote, that's how you find out if everyone can handle pressure." 8 years old said that? He has a lot of opinions for his age. She was looking at him differently now, not the evaluation look from the beginning of the evening. Something more open, more like actual curiosity. "You love him so much it's almost hard to look at," she said, and then she seemed to hear herself and turned back toward the room. "Sorry," she said. "That came out more—" "No," Ethan said. "It's okay. You're right." She nodded once, collected herself. "We should circulate." They circulated. For the next 2 hours, Ethan shook hands with people who managed enormous amounts of other people's money, listened to a brief but surprisingly engaging talk about wildlife conservation that he hadn't expected to find interesting and did, and deflected 3 different versions of the question, "So how did you and Sophia meet?" with a variation of "we worked together" that was technically true and satisfied nobody, which was the goal. He did not perform. She had asked him not to, and he found he didn't want to anyway. He was just himself, polite, slightly direct, occasionally dry, aware that he was out of his depth in certain conversational registers and trying not to pretend otherwise. He asked the sailboat man a second question. He told the pension fund woman an honest answer to something that would have been easier to gloss over. He didn't try to be impressive. He just tried to be accurate. On the way out, in the car she'd arranged, she was quiet for the first few minutes. "Gerald is going to talk about you," she said eventually. "Is that bad?" "Not in the way you're worried about. He's going to say you seem solid." She looked at the city going past the window. "That's actually a more useful thing than impressive." "Is that a compliment?" "It's an observation." A pause. "But yes." The following 3 weeks moved in a rhythm that surprised him by becoming, if not comfortable, then at least navigable. There was a second event, an investor dinner with a smaller guest list and considerably more pointed conversation, and a third, a public appearance at an arts foundation benefit that required them to be photographed together for the first time, which produced a specific and unspoken awkwardness that they resolved by standing close enough to look natural without discussing how close was natural. She called him the morning after the photograph appeared in a business column. He was in the school pickup line. "The photo is fine," she said without preamble. "Better than fine, actually. My communications director is quietly relieved. Good morning to you, too." "Sorry." A beat. "Good morning." "The photo is fine," he confirmed. "I looked at it. We look like people who know each other." "We do know each other. We know each other adjacent to a contract." "Ethan." Her voice was dry. "I know that your son's kickball opinions have shaped his moral philosophy. That's not contract knowledge." He was quiet for a moment. In the car ahead of him, a child was pressing their face against the back window, making an expression at him. He made a face back. The child dissolved into laughter. "How are you sleeping?" she asked. The question came out of nowhere, or not exactly nowhere. He'd mentioned briefly at the second event that he often lay awake working through work problems. Better this week, he said. You? Not great. She said it matter-of-factly. There's a board meeting next month that I'm preparing for, and when I'm preparing for board meetings, I tend to run scenarios in my head at 2 in the morning. What kind of scenarios? All the ways things can go wrong, and how I'd respond to each one. Does that help? It helps me feel like I'm doing something. A pause. Whether that's the same as helping is a question I try not to examine too closely. The pickup line moved forward. He could see Liam now, standing with his backpack slightly too far back on his shoulders the way he always wore it, talking to someone. Can I ask you something? He said. You're going to ask it either way. What happens when the 6 months ends? Professionally, I mean. For me. She was quiet for a moment. The working group will have concluded by then. Your file will reflect the contributions you've made on it. I can't promise you a promotion. That's not within the arrangement, and it wouldn't be honest to suggest it. But your position will be secure and your record will be real. Okay. Is that not enough? It's honest, he said. So yeah, it's enough. Liam reached the car, pulled the door open, dropped into the seat. He was holding a drawing. 1 second, Ethan said into the phone. Dad, Liam said immediately, I need to tell you about the most unfair thing that happened today. But first, is that a work call? Because if it's work, I can wait. Ethan looked at his son, at the drawing in his lap, which appeared to be of a dog, though he wasn't certain. Sophia, he said into the phone, I have to go. I heard, she said. Go. He ended the call. Okay, he said to Liam. What happened? So you know how I said Marcus was too serious about kickball? You said you might be too serious about kickball. That was a temporary position. I've reconsidered. Liam held up the drawing. Also, I made this. It's for the refrigerator. It was a dog. A very competent dog, Ethan thought, clearly descended from a long line of dragons with invisible wings. It's going on the refrigerator, Ethan confirmed. Liam nodded, satisfied, and launched into the story of the unfair thing, which involved disputed territory at recess, and a rule that Liam was certain existed but could not find written down anywhere. Ethan listened. He drove. The city moved past the windows. He didn't think about the arrangement or the board meeting or Gerald Whitfield or the photograph in the business column. He thought about the kickball. He asked a second question, the way he'd asked about the sailboat, because asking a second question meant you were actually paying attention. Liam talked all the way home. The drawing went on the refrigerator. The drawing stayed on the refrigerator through November, curling slightly at one corner where the tape had started to lose its grip, and Ethan kept meaning to replace the tape and kept not doing it because the curl had become part of the drawing somehow, the way small imperfections become features when you look at them long enough. Sophia saw it for the first time on a Saturday in the 3rd week of November, 6 weeks into the arrangement, when she came to his apartment for a reason that had started as professional and become somewhere in transit, something harder to categorize. She'd called that morning. He was in the kitchen making Liam's breakfast, the phone wedged between his ear and his shoulder, the way he did things when both hands were occupied. She'd said there was a document she needed his eyes on before Monday, something in the Whitmore integration framework that his working group had flagged and that now had legal implications she wanted a non-lawyer perspective on, specifically before the board meeting in 2 weeks. He'd said he could come to the office. She'd said it was Saturday, and then there was a pause, and she'd said she could come to him if that was easier. He'd looked around the apartment with the specific awareness of someone who lives in a place and suddenly sees it as someone else might. The dishes from last night, Liam's shoes in the middle of the floor, the dog drawing on the refrigerator. It's not much, he'd said. Ethan, she'd said, I just need a table in an hour. She'd brought the documents in a leather portfolio and coffee from the place 2 blocks from the office, the expensive one, and she'd handed him a cup without making it a gesture. He'd taken it the same way. They'd sat at his kitchen table, which was too small for the number of things usually on it, and slightly better now because he'd moved them, and she'd walked him through the framework issue. It was a real issue. He saw it in about 4 minutes, the same way he'd seen the original discrepancy in the Whitmore documentation. Not a dramatic problem, but the kind that became dramatic if it went unaddressed. A misalignment between the integration timeline and the compliance reporting window that would create a gap where things could fall through or be pushed through, depending on who was paying attention and what they wanted to happen. Someone on the legal team should have caught this, he said. Yes, she said. They didn't. Are you asking me whether it was an accident? She looked at him steadily. I'm asking you what you think. He thought about it. He thought about the software error that had sat broken for years. He thought about errors that persist because fixing them requires admitting they're broken. I think it could be either, he said carefully, and I think the fact that I can't tell which should concern you more than the gap itself. She was quiet. She wrote something in the margin of one of the documents. That's what I needed to hear, she said. My communications director was going to tell me not to worry about it. My general counsel was going to tell me it was procedural. I needed someone to say that out loud. He looked at her. Why me? Because you're not trying to manage me. She closed the portfolio. Everyone in my professional life is managing me to some extent. Managing the information I get, managing my reactions to it, managing the version of the situation I see. You just say the thing. He wasn't sure that was entirely true about himself, but he understood why she said it, and he didn't argue. It was around then that Liam came out of his room. He appeared in the kitchen doorway in his socks and pajama shirt. He'd put pants on because Ethan had established a rule about pants around guests, but he'd put on the ones with the holes in both knees that should have been thrown out 2 months ago. He looked at Sophia with the completely unguarded appraisal of a child who has no investment in making a good impression. You're the one from the company, he said. Sophia looked at him. I am, she said, with no adjustment in register. No brightness, no performance, just a direct answer. Dad said you're important. He's too kind. He said you run everything. Almost everything, Sophia said. Some things run themselves. Liam considered this philosophically. I'm Liam. I know. I'm Sophia. He climbed into the chair across from her, the one Ethan had been sitting in before he moved to the counter to give Liam his space, and he looked at the documents on the table. Is that a contract? It's a framework analysis. What's a framework analysis? It's a document that's supposed to say how something works, and we're trying to figure out where it doesn't say that. Liam nodded slowly, with the expression of someone who finds this mildly interesting. Then he pointed at the dog drawing on the refrigerator. I made that, he said. Sophia turned and looked at it. The curled corner. The very competent dog. I can tell, she said. Can you tell it's a dog? Immediately. Very good leg. Liam looked pleased. My teacher said the proportions were off. Your teacher, Sophia said, is technically correct and also missing the point. Liam stared at her for a moment. Then he looked at Ethan in the way he looked at Ethan when something surprised him. That quick sideways check, the recalibration. He looked back at Sophia. Dad makes eggs on Saturday, he said. Do you want some? Something moved across Sophia Lancaster's face that had no professional name. It was brief and she controlled it quickly, but Ethan saw it from the counter, the moment of being caught off guard by simple human kindness in a form small enough to slip under the defenses. She looked at the refrigerator, at the dog, at Liam's patient and earnest face. I would like that very much, she said. Thank you. Ethan made eggs. The three of them ate at the small kitchen table. Liam talked about the kickball situation, which had entered a new phase involving a proposed rule amendment that Liam was drafting, and about the chapter book they were reading, which had reached a development he found simultaneously exciting and stressful, and about a kid in his class named Tyler who claimed to have seen a real coyote in his backyard and who Liam was 40% sure was telling the truth. Sophia asked questions, real ones, not the kind adults ask children when they're waiting for their turn to talk, but the kind that meant she was actually listening to the answers. At one point, she asked Liam what he thought about the coyote situation, what the determining factors were for his 40% estimation, and Liam responded with a level of analytical rigor that made Ethan want to laugh and also made him feel the specific quiet pride that had no good way to express itself in front of other people. When she left an hour later, portfolio under her arm, she paused at the door. "Thank you," she said, "for the eggs and the other thing." "The framework?" "That too." She looked at him for one moment with an expression that was trying to be neutral and not quite achieving it. Then she went, and he closed the door, and Liam appeared at his elbow immediately. "She's not what I expected," Liam said. "What did you expect?" Liam thought about it. "Louder," he said finally. "People who run things are usually louder." "Not always." "She asks good questions," Liam said, with the authority of someone for whom this was a primary metric of character. Then he went back to his room, and Ethan stood in the kitchen, looking at the curled corner of the dog drawing for a while before he put the coffee cups in the sink. The board meeting was on a Monday in early December, and the 2 weeks leading up to it changed something in Sophia's rhythm that Ethan could track without being told directly. Her messages came at different hours, later at night, or early in a way that meant she'd been awake before she should have been. When they appeared at the third event, an investor cocktail reception at a gallery space with very expensive art on the walls and very free drinks in circulation, she was present and composed in all the visible ways and somewhere else underneath them. He noticed because he'd learned to notice. This was, he thought, one of the stranger side effects of the arrangement. The development of a working knowledge of another person's interior states that came not from intimacy exactly, but from sustained attention. He knew that she held her shoulders differently when she was managing something versus when she was managing someone. He knew that her humor got drier when she was under pressure, more precise, like she was cutting off the extra weight. He knew she laughed quickest when she wasn't expecting to. At the gallery reception, she introduced him to 3 investors who mattered and 2 who thought they did, the way she'd taught him to distinguish, and she handled a pointed question from a silver-haired man named Fordham about the Whitmore integration timeline with the kind of measured accuracy that left nothing to grip and nothing to be angry about. Ethan watched her do it and thought about what she'd said, "Everyone is managing me," and thought about what it cost to move through every room being that careful. On the way out, she was quiet. "Fordham was the one who caught the timeline question," she said in the car. "He's been briefed by someone on the board." "Is that unexpected?" "No." She looked out the window. "Just confirming the shape of things." "Gerald?" "Probably." She said it without heat. "He's building a case for the merger. Every loose end he can find in the integration framework becomes an argument that we need Sterling's backing to stabilize the process." The name sat between them in the car. Adrian Sterling. Ethan had done what he'd told himself he wouldn't do and looked the man up. 44, second-generation money, a corporate portfolio that was impressive in scale and almost entirely the result of acquisition rather than anything built. He looked like the kind of person Central Casting would select to play someone like Adrian Sterling, which was either a coincidence or something more deliberate. "What happens if they push it to a vote?" Ethan asked. "Depends on which way the independents go." She was watching the city. "I've been working the independents for 3 months. Do you think you have them?" "I think I have 4 of the 6 I need. The other 2... She stopped. "I don't know. They're legitimately uncertain. Not malicious. Just genuinely unsure whether my way, or Gerald's way, is better for the company long term. I can make arguments, but I can't make them believe things they don't believe." "What do you believe?" She turned from the window. "I believe that companies built on forced arrangements don't last. Mergers, partnerships, marriages." A brief pause at the word. "You can manufacture the structure. You can't manufacture the thing that makes the structure hold." He didn't say anything to that. She seemed to realize she'd said more than she intended and turned back to the window. The city kept moving. The car kept going. The night of the board meeting itself, he was at home helping Liam with a project on state capitals when his phone buzzed. Not a call. A message. 1 line. "It went better than I planned and worse than I hoped. I'll tell you more tomorrow." He stared at it for a moment. He typed back, "That sounds like most things," then deleted it. Then typed, "You still standing?" and sent that instead. Her reply took 4 minutes. "Yes." Barely, but yes. He put the phone down. Liam was looking at him. "Work?" Liam asked. "Yeah." "Is someone having a bad day?" Ethan looked at his son. Something like that. Liam nodded, turning back to his map worksheet. You should tell them the capital of Montana, he said. I just learned it, and it's actually a good one. Helena, it sounds like it should be somewhere else, but it's there. Ethan smiled despite himself. I'll pass that along. He found out what better than planned, worse than hoped, meant 3 days later, standing in the Vantage lobby after a working group session, when Sophia came through the main doors with a look on her face that he'd learned was her managing something expression, not her managing someone expression. Walk with me, she said. They walked to a small conference room off the main corridor that people used for calls they didn't want overheard. She closed the door. She stood with her back to it for a moment, and he got the impression she was deciding how to say something. The board didn't vote on the merger, she said. They tabled it, which is what I wanted. Okay. But Gerald proposed something else, as a compromise. She crossed her arms. He's put forward a formal motion that I announce an engagement by Q1, not specifically to Sterling. He was careful about that, careful enough to make it look reasonable. Just that I make a public commitment that addresses the board's concerns about stability and image. She paused. The motion passed, 5-4. The room was quiet. He looked at her face. That's not a legal requirement. No, it's a board recommendation. The difference between a recommendation and a requirement depends on how much you want to fight it and what it costs to fight it. She looked at the middle distance. If I refuse outright, Gerald calls a vote of confidence. I'd probably survive it, but probably isn't the same as certainly, and the uncertainty itself damages the company's position in the market while we wait for it to resolve. So you're trapped. I'm in a corner. A different word. She noticed him notice the distinction. I'm not trapped. I'm in a corner, and I need to think about angles. He sat on the edge of the conference table. She stayed at the door. The distance between them felt specific. Is this where the arrangement stops working? He asked. She looked at him sharply. What do you mean? The arrangement was 6 months. Control the narrative, redirect the story. But if the board has formally moved on this, the arrangement does what it was supposed to do, she said. I have a partner on record. That satisfies the optics of the recommendation for now. It buys time. And after 6 months? She didn't answer immediately, which was itself an answer. Sophia. He said her name simply. Tell me what you actually want here. Not the strategy version, not the board version. She looked at him for a long moment. The particular look she'd developed in the 6 weeks since the briefing room. Not the appraisal look, not the managing look. The one underneath those that she hadn't had when they started. I want to not be in this room, she said. I want to be at your kitchen table with bad Saturday eggs, and your son telling me my proportions are actually fine. It was more honest than either of them had been in weeks. It landed in the room with the weight of something that couldn't be unsaid. He stood up. He started to say something, he wasn't sure what, something careful and measured and probably true, when his phone rang. The specific ringtone he'd set for the after-school program, the tone he never ignored. He looked at it. Her. Go, Sophia said immediately. I need to... Go, Ethan. He went. In the hallway, he answered. The program coordinator told him quickly that Liam wasn't hurt. First, she always said that first, she was good about that, but that he'd gotten into an argument that had gotten physical, and the other child's parent was present, and could Ethan come as soon as possible? He came as soon as possible. Liam was sitting in the coordinator's office with his arms crossed and his jaw set, in the expression Ethan recognized as the one that appeared after Liam had made a decision he stood behind completely and was waiting for the world to tell him he was wrong. There was a scrape on his palm from the ground. Nothing else, which was something. The other parent, a man named Garrett, who was tall and dressed in gym clothes and already annoyed before Ethan walked in, explained the situation at volume. His son had said something about Liam's mother. Liam had responded with a shove. The coordinator confirmed the sequence. Garrett said, Your kid put his hands on my son. I know, Ethan said. Give me a minute with him. He crouched in front of Liam. The coordinator and Garrett both stood back because something in Ethan's voice when he said, Give me a minute was not a request. What did he say? Ethan asked quietly. Liam looked at his hands. He said I didn't have a mom because she didn't want us. The room was very quiet. And you shoved him? Yes. Ethan looked at his son, at the scrape on his palm, at the set of his small jaw that was identical in this moment to the set of Ethan's own. He breathed in once through his nose. He didn't say that the shove was wrong, because Liam already knew that, and saying it now was just noise. He also didn't say that Liam was wrong to be angry, because he wasn't. Does your hand hurt? Ethan asked. A little. Okay. He stood. He turned to Garrett, who was still annoyed. My son shouldn't have shoved your son. That's on me to address, and I will. Your son said something designed to hurt mine. That's on you. He looked at the man steadily. I'd like both of us to handle our respective problems. Garrett looked like he wanted to argue about sequence. He looked at Ethan's face and decided against it. The coordinator, visibly relieved, moved the meeting toward its conclusion. In the car afterward, Liam was quiet. Not sulking, processing, which was different. They drove for 3 blocks before he spoke. She left before I was 2, Liam said. I don't even know what she looks like. I know, Ethan said. It's not because of us. No, it's not. Ethan stopped at a light. It's about her. I know. Liam looked at the window. I just didn't want him to say it like that, like it was a thing wrong with us. Ethan looked at his son. There is nothing wrong with us. Liam nodded. Then he said in a slightly different voice, Is Sophia going to come over again? Ethan looked back at the road when the light changed. I don't know, he said, which was the honest answer. I liked the questions she asked, Liam said. He looked at his scraped palm. She asked them like she wants to know the answer, not like she's being polite. Ethan drove. The city moved past them. Somewhere behind them, the conference room was still empty. The honest thing that had been said in it was still sitting in the air. He didn't know what to do with it yet. That was also honest, and probably what scared him most. Not that it was complicated, but that it was starting to feel simple, and simple was the version that could actually hurt. He took Liam home. He cleaned the scrape on his palm, which required 3 separate negotiations about the sting of antiseptic, and put a bandage on it that had a small cartoon on it that Liam was technically too old for and that he selected anyway without comment. He made dinner. He read the chapter book. He sat on the edge of the bed in the dark after. He thought about better than planned, worse than hoped. He thought about, I want to be at your kitchen table. He thought about his son, 8 years old, who had absorbed the fact of his mother's absence into himself like a weather system he'd learned to live in, and who had identified, with the accuracy that made Ethan alternately proud and undone, that Sophia Lancaster asked questions like she wanted to know the answers. He thought that was a more important thing than it sounded. He sat there for a long time in the dark of his son's room before he went to bed, and he did not resolve anything, and he did not decide anything. And the feeling that had been accumulating in the space between him and Sophia Lancaster for 6 weeks sat in his chest like something he hadn't yet found the right name for, and maybe didn't want to, because naming it would make it real, and real was the thing that could be lost. 2 weeks after the board meeting, the news broke on a Thursday morning in a business column that ran early online. Adrian Sterling had given a brief statement, gracious, strategic, said in the practiced way of someone who'd planned it, confirming that discussions with Vantage Solutions regarding a potential partnership were progressing positively, and that he looked forward to deepening that relationship in the new year. He did not mention Sophia by name. He didn't have to. The column did it for him. Ethan read it at his desk before his first meeting, with his coffee going cold beside him, and he felt something shift in his chest with the specific, quiet finality of a door being closed in another room. He did not call her. He waited. She called at noon. You saw, she said. Yes. A pause. I didn't know he was going to make a statement. I want to be clear about that. I believe you. Ethan, I believe you, he said again, and he meant it. The question isn't whether you knew. The question is what it means. She was quiet for a moment. I don't know yet, she said finally. I need a few days to understand the shape of it. Okay? Don't. She stopped, started again. Don't make any decisions until I understand the shape of it. He looked at the column on his screen, at Sterling's name, at the careful constructed language of it. "Okay," he said again. But that night, lying awake at 2 in the morning, running the scenarios the way she ran her scenarios, he thought about what she'd said at the gallery. You can manufacture the structure. You can't manufacture the thing that makes the structure hold. And he thought about Liam's voice in the car, saying it's not because of us, the tone of a child who had learned early that some losses aren't about worth. He thought about the envelope in his sock drawer. He thought about how much was in it now. He thought about how a man knew when he was temporary. The few days she'd asked for stretched into 5, and in those 5 days, Ethan went to work and picked up Liam and made dinner and read the chapter book and did every ordinary thing in the ordinary sequence, and the feeling in his chest that he hadn't named stayed exactly where it was, unchanged, the way certain things don't move regardless of how much time you give them. On the 5th day, a Friday, she appeared at his office door on the 14th floor. He looked up from his screen and she was just standing there, which was not a thing that happened. Sophia Lancaster did not appear in doorways on the 14th floor. The 14th floor was not a place she had occasion to be, and the 3 people in his immediate vicinity had gone completely still in the way of people witnessing something they don't have context for. "Can you come up?" she said. He could tell from her face that she'd figured out the shape of it. "Give me 5 minutes," he said. She nodded and left, and Marcus, 2 desks over, swiveled his chair approximately 12 degrees toward Ethan without turning his head. Ethan ignored him, saved the document he was in, put on his jacket, and went to the elevator. She was waiting in the small conference room off the 38th floor corridor, not her office. A deliberate choice, he thought, neutral ground, no desk between them. She was standing at the window when he came in, which was becoming a pattern, but this time she turned around immediately, before he'd fully closed the door. "Sterling gave that statement because Gerald briefed him," she said. "Not because the deal is done. Because Gerald wants it to look like the deal is done so that the pressure becomes a fait accompli rather than a choice. It's a tactic. I figured. I've spent 5 days working out which of the independents Gerald has been talking to and what he's been telling them." She paused. "He's been telling them I'm unstable, not professionally, personally. That the arrangement with you is a sign of poor judgment. That I manufactured a relationship for optics and it reflects poorly on my decision-making under pressure." Ethan absorbed that. He's not entirely wrong about the manufactured part. He's wrong about what it reflects. She crossed her arms. The arrangement was a calculated decision. Calculated decisions are my job. What he's doing is using the arrangement to suggest I can't handle the pressure of the board recommendation, which means my response needs to be something that can't be reframed as instability. What does that look like? She looked at him directly. It looks like a CEO who makes a clear, public, unapologetic choice. Not an arrangement, not a managed narrative. A real choice, stated plainly, regardless of the cost. He waited. He could see she was building toward something and he wasn't going to shortcut it. "I want to refuse the engagement recommendation," she said, formally, on the record, at the next board session. "I want to table the Sterling conversation permanently and state, clearly, that the board does not have authority over my personal decisions." "What does that cost you?" "Potentially the vote of confidence." She said it steadily. "Gerald will call it. I think I have 5 of the 9. Maybe 6. Maybe 6 isn't a sure thing." "No, it isn't." He looked at her. "And you're telling me this because if I do this, it changes the arrangement." She paused. "What I'm describing isn't the controlled narrative we contracted for. It's the opposite. It removes all the protection the arrangement gave you. You become associated with a CEO who publicly defied her board, and that association is real, and the outcome of it is uncertain." The room was quiet. "You're giving me an out," he said. "I'm giving you accurate information so you can make an informed decision." "Sophia." He waited until she met his eyes. "Those are different things, and you know it." She looked away. Out the window. Back. "Yes," she said. "I know." He sat down in one of the conference chairs. She was still standing, and he thought about how she almost never sat down first, how she managed distance and height the same way she managed everything. Not aggressively, but automatically. The instincts of someone who'd spent years in rooms where those things mattered. He thought about the kitchen table, the eggs, the way she'd asked Liam a second question. "Here's what I think," he said. "I think you've been running calculations since Thursday, and you've landed on this decision, and you're not asking me whether it's right. You're asking whether I'm going to complicate it." Something in her face moved. "That's a fair reading. So I'll tell you something that's also fair." He put his hands flat on the table. "I'm not going to complicate it. Whatever you decide in that boardroom is yours to decide. The arrangement was what it was, and it accomplished what you needed it to, and I don't have a claim on the outcome of your business decisions." "That's not—" "Ethan, I'm not worried about claims. I'm worried about you. You don't need to be worried about me. You have a child," she said, with a specificity that landed. "A child whose stability depends on yours. If this goes wrong—" "I've been managing wrong for 8 years," he said, and it came out flat and honest and slightly harder than he intended. "I'm not afraid of wrong. Wrong is it's just Tuesday sometimes. It's just what it is." He looked at her. "Go do the thing you need to do. I'll be okay." She looked at him for a long time with the expression that wasn't the appraisal and wasn't the management and wasn't the underneath one either. Something new, something that had been building for weeks, and that he'd been careful not to look at directly the way you don't look directly at certain light sources. "I don't want this to end," she said. Just that, plainly. The room held it. "Which part?" he asked quietly. "You know which part." He did know. He'd known for a while, the way you know something before you let yourself say it, the knowing that lives in the body before it reaches the part of you that makes decisions. "Sophia, don't." She shook her head once. "Don't tell me it's the arrangement talking, or the situation. I've thought about that, and I know what that sounds like, and this isn't it." "I wasn't going to say that." "What were you going to say?" He stood up. He was quiet for a moment, choosing, because some things once said take up permanent residence, and he wanted to be sure. "I was going to say that it can't be a decision you make while the board is in the middle of a motion, and Gerald is running a campaign, and Sterling's name is in the press. You deserve to make it when none of that is in the room." She looked at him. "And if I'm still sure when none of that is in the room, then we'll talk," he said. "When none of that is in the room." It wasn't enough, and it wasn't nothing. She nodded once, the way she nodded when she was accepting a term she didn't entirely agree with but understood the logic of. He walked to the door. "Ethan," he stopped. Her voice had shifted slightly. "Whatever happens in the board meeting, I need you to know that the last 3 months weren't—" She stopped, tried again. "You were never just a solution to a problem." He stood at the door with his hand on the frame. He thought about the charity auction and the sailboat man and the pension fund woman. He thought about the photograph in the business column and 2 people who'd learned to stand close enough to look natural. He thought about eggs on a Saturday morning and a dog drawing with invisible things behind it. "I know," he said. "Neither were you." He left. The board meeting was on a Wednesday, and he heard about it the way the rest of the company heard about it, in fragments, spreading outward from whatever room it had happened in, passing through the building like weather. By 11 in the morning, 3 people had mentioned it to him unprompted. By 1 in the afternoon, Marcus had forwarded him an internal memo that was technically confidential and that people were forwarding anyway because the situation was too significant for the usual discretion. By 2:30, the financial press was running it online. The headline, on the column that had published the Sterling statement, read, "Lancaster rejects merger condition in closed board session. Future of Vantage, Sterling, deal uncertain." The article said that Sophia Lancaster had formally rejected the board's recommendation regarding a public engagement, had declined to comment on the Sterling discussions, and had stated in a prepared address to the full board that she would not allow the governance structure of Vantage Solutions to extend to decisions that fell outside its authority. It said Gerald Whitfield had subsequently moved for a vote of confidence. It said the vote had not yet been called. The article did not say how many votes she had. Ethan read it at his desk, with his door open, and the ambient noise of the floor continuing around him as if nothing had shifted, and he thought about 5, maybe 6. He thought about the way she'd said maybe 6 isn't a sure thing, with the steadiness of someone who had decided the certainty wasn't the point. Marcus appeared in his doorway at 3, holding 2 coffees, which was either a gesture of solidarity or an excuse to talk, which for Marcus were usually the same thing. "You knew," Marcus said, sitting down without being invited. "I knew she was thinking about it. Thinking about telling a board of directors they don't get a vote in her love life, in public, on the record." Marcus shook his head. It's what she decided." "How are you?" Ethan looked at him. "I'm fine." "You look like someone in the middle of a decision." "I'm not in the middle of anything. It's her decision. It's her company." "Ethan?" Marcus gave him the look he gave when Ethan was doing the thing where he said accurate things that were nevertheless incomplete. "How are you?" He looked at his coffee, the screen, the window. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do here," he said finally. "She's in a vote of confidence because of something she did, which she did for reasons that include me, and I'm sitting on the 14th floor watching a memo go around." "What do you want to do?" "That's not the... What do you want to do?" He was quiet for a moment. "Nothing I do right now helps her," he said. "Any move I make is a variable in something she's in the middle of managing. The best thing I can do is stay out of it." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. "That's probably true," he said, "and it's also a very good reason to do exactly what you already wanted to do anyway." Ethan didn't answer that. The vote of confidence came the following Monday morning. He found out the result through Daniel, Sophia's assistant, who sent a single sentence to his work email at 9:52 a.m. 6-3. She's okay. He sat with that for a moment. 6, the number she hadn't been sure about. He typed back, "Thank you for telling me." Then he went back to work. She called him that evening, after 8, after Liam was in bed. He was sitting at the kitchen table with the remnants of dinner still on it because he'd been meaning to clear it and hadn't. 6-3, she said. "I know, Daniel told me." "I told him to." A pause. "I was in back-to-back sessions all day and I didn't want you to go all day not knowing." He looked at the dog drawing on the refrigerator. The tape had finally lost the corner entirely and it had been refixed with a new piece sometime last week, recentered, the curl corrected. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I think so. He's not going away. He's going to regroup and come at it differently. But the company is stable, the independence held, and the sterling thing is off the table." She exhaled, and it was the first unguarded sound he'd heard from her in days. "I'm tired." "Yeah." "Can I—" She stopped. "What?" "Can I just talk to you for a while? Not about any of this, just—" "Yeah," he said. "Of course." So they talked. She asked about Liam's kickball rule amendment, which had apparently been submitted in writing to his class teacher, and which was, Ethan reported, under formal consideration. She told him about something that had happened in the margins of one of her sessions. A junior associate who had mispronounced a term 3 times and corrected himself 3 times with increasing mortification, and the way everyone had pretended not to notice, which was somehow worse. He told her about the chapter book, which had reached its conclusion, and the way Liam had received the ending with the solemn satisfaction of someone who had known all along how it would go. "Was it good?" she asked. "It was pretty good." He paused. "The main character didn't have a dog." She laughed, and it was the real one, the one that caught her slightly off guard. He heard it in his kitchen at 8:30 on a Monday night with his son asleep down the hall and the dinner dishes still on the table, and the feeling in his chest that he'd spent weeks not naming moved, finally, into something he was going to have to deal with. "I should let you sleep," he said. "Probably." She didn't hang up immediately. "Ethan, the board thing is done. The sterling thing is done. That's what you said. Make the decision when none of that is in the room." He was quiet. "Is it out of the room?" she asked. He thought about what he was, carefully and honestly. A man with a kid and a car that still needed a brake job and a sock drawer with an envelope in it, sitting in a kitchen in an apartment that was not impressive from the outside, and that he had filled piece by piece with things his son chose and things he built himself. He thought about what she was. He thought about the gap between those things and whether a gap was the same as a distance. "It's getting there," he said. "That's not the same as yes." "No, it isn't." Another pause, not an uncomfortable one. "Okay," she said, Getting there is okay. He cleared the table after they hung up. He washed the dishes. He stood at the sink looking at the dog drawing, now fully retaped, the curl corrected, hanging straight, and thought about what Liam had said in the car. She asked them like she wants to know the answer. He put in for the transfer on a Thursday. It wasn't an impulse. He'd been thinking about it for 2 weeks, running it the way she ran her scenarios, all the shapes it could take, all the directions it could go wrong. The Whitmore integration had produced an opening in the regional documentation office in Millhaven, a mid-sized city about 4 hours north, a position 2 levels above what he currently held with a salary that would close the gap between the envelope in the sock drawer and what Liam's school had told him the secondary program costs would look like in 2 years. He had not told her he was thinking about it. That was deliberate. Whatever she'd said on the phone, whatever had been building in the space between them, he could not make a decision about his son's future in relation to it. He could not let the feeling in his chest, still unnamed, still there, become the axis everything turned around. That was not responsible. That was not what a parent did. He submitted the request to HR and to Patricia, who ran the working group, and Patricia looked at him with the expression of someone who was not surprised and also not pleased, and said she would approve it because it was the right move for him professionally and because she was not going to stand in the way of that. And he thanked her. He told Marcus at the coffee place because Marcus would find out anyway, and because Marcus was the only person at Vantage who had known the whole shape of things from the beginning. Marcus held his cup in both hands and looked at the table for a long time. "Have you told her?" he asked. "Not yet." "When?" "Soon." "Ethan." Marcus looked up. She stood in front of her board and refused a $100 million deal and a vote of confidence. And you think she's going to let you go without... "It's not about letting," Ethan said. "She doesn't get a vote in where I take my son." Marcus was quiet. "The arrangement ends in 3 weeks," Ethan said. "The transfer starts in 5. That's 2 weeks of overlap, and then Liam and I are in Millhaven. New school, better program, more money, less..." He stopped. "Less what?" He looked at his coffee. "Less of a situation where I'm making personal decisions that are actually about something else." Marcus sat back. He looked like a man who wanted to say several things and was choosing carefully which one. "You're afraid," he said finally. "I'm practical." "Those aren't the same thing." "Sometimes they are." Marcus shook his head slowly. "For what it's worth, and I know you're going to do what you're going to do, I think you're using Liam as a reason when the actual reason is that you don't think you're worth the complication." Ethan looked at him. "I'm not saying you're wrong to go," Marcus said. "Millhaven's a real opportunity, and your kid comes first, always. I know that. I'm saying the reason you're framing it as the only option." He shrugged. "I'm just saying I see it." Ethan said nothing for a moment. He drank his coffee. "Tell her," Marcus said. "At least tell her before she hears it from HR." He told her that evening. He called her because that was better than a message and better than in person, which he was not sure he could manage cleanly. She answered on the second ring. He said it plainly. The transfer. The timeline. The reasons, the real ones. Liam's school costs, the position, the salary, the honest math of what their lives needed over the next 2 years. She was quiet while he talked. She let him finish. "Millhaven," she said, "it's a good opportunity." "I know it is." Her voice was even, controlled in the way that meant something was moving under the control. "When did you decide?" "I've been thinking about it for 2 weeks." "You didn't say anything?" "No." Another pause. Were you already thinking about this before the board meeting?" "Yes." "So it's not because of anything except what I told you," he said. "Liam and the numbers and the position. That's true." "Okay." She breathed in once, quiet. "Okay." "Sophia, don't apologize," she said. "Please don't apologize to me." "I wasn't going to." "Good." A silence. "Is there anything that..." She stopped, started again. "Would anything be different if I asked you to stay?" He sat with the question. He gave it the honest weight it deserved. "Not the math," he said finally. "The math is the math. Liam's school, the salary, the position, none of that changes. She understood what he wasn't saying. He could tell from the quality of the silence. The arrangement ends in 3 weeks, she said. Yes. So we're talking about after the arrangement. Yes. And you've decided, she said, that after the arrangement, regardless of, you've decided. He thought about the envelope. He thought about Liam in the car. It's not because of us, the tone of a child who'd learned that some losses come from somewhere else entirely. He thought about what Marcus had said, and whether it was true, and whether it being true changed anything about what was right. I've decided, he said. The silence this time was longer. All right, she said, and her voice had gone somewhere he hadn't heard it go before. Not managed, not controlled, just quiet. Just a person being quiet on the other end of a phone. All right. He stayed on the line for a moment. She did too. The dog drawing, she said finally. Tell Liam I said the proportions were perfect. He closed his eyes. I will, he said. She hung up first. He sat at the kitchen table in the silence of the apartment, with the dog drawing on the refrigerator and his son asleep down the hall, and the envelope in his sock drawer and the decision made. And the feeling in his chest that he'd spent 3 months not naming sat exactly where it had always sat, unchanged, the way certain things don't move regardless of what you decide about them. He did not cry. He was not a man who cried easily. He cleared the table. He turned off the lights. He went to bed. He lay awake for a long time. In the dark, thinking about a woman who asked questions like she wanted to know the answers, and about the courage it took to leave, and about the courage it took to stay, and about which one he was doing and whether he was sure. He was not entirely sure. That was the truest thing. The last 3 weeks of the arrangement were the quietest. Not uncomfortable exactly. They still exchanged messages, still spoke on the phone twice, still appeared together at one final event, a small industry dinner that had been on the calendar since October and that they attended with the careful ease of people who have learned each other's rhythms and are aware, without discussing it, that the learning is almost over. They were good at it by now. That was the strange part. By the time the contract was winding down, they had become genuinely good at being in rooms together, at knowing when to stand close and when to give space, at reading which conversations needed the other person present and which ones were better navigated alone. At the industry dinner, a woman named Carla, who ran a mid-sized investment firm, asked Sophia how long they'd been together, and Sophia said 3 months, which was technically accurate and completely true and contained more complexity than any honest answer to that question could accommodate. Carla looked at Ethan and said he seemed grounded, which was the kind of thing people said when they meant steady, which was the kind of thing people meant when they'd seen too many people in that room who weren't. I try, Ethan said. You either are or you aren't, Carla said. Trying doesn't really enter into it. He thought about that on the drive home. He thought about it in the way he'd been thinking about a lot of things in those final weeks. Not obsessively, not with the 2 a.m. energy of someone who hasn't decided, but with the quieter attention of someone who has decided and is living in the space just before the decision takes effect. Liam knew about Millhaven by then. Ethan had told him on a Sunday, at the kitchen table, the same table where Sophia had sat with her portfolio and her coffee 3 months ago. He'd told him plainly, new city, better school, the apartment they'd looked at online that had a slightly larger bedroom for Liam and a bus route that went directly to the school and a park 2 blocks away that had a structure Ethan had described as interesting and Liam had described, based on the photographs, as possibly adequate. Liam had been quiet for a moment. Then he'd asked, Is Sophia going to be in Millhaven? No, Ethan had said. She stays here. The company is here. Liam had looked at the table, then at the refrigerator, at the dog drawing, fully retaped, hanging straight. He hadn't said anything else about it for several days, which was its own kind of thing to carry. On the last day of the contract, a Friday, Daniel sent the formal closeout documentation to the paralegal friend who had reviewed the original. There was no ceremony to it. There wasn't supposed to be. Jess called Ethan that afternoon and said everything was clean and in order, which was not a surprise because everything in the contract had always been clean and in order. It was one of the things that had made it feel real, the specificity of it, the care. He didn't hear from Sophia that day. He hadn't expected to and told himself it was fine, which it was, mostly. He started packing that weekend. Moving with a child is a specific kind of organized chaos. There is the packing that gets done efficiently and the packing that requires negotiation. Liam had opinions about what went in which box and stronger opinions about what was allowed in the car versus the moving truck. The dragon painting from third grade went in the car, non-negotiable. The flat-pack bookshelf was disassembled in pieces by Ethan on a Saturday afternoon, each piece labeled with masking tape and a marker in Liam's handwriting because Liam had asked to label and Ethan had said yes and then spent 20 minutes trying to read Liam's labeling system. "This says SD," Ethan said, holding up a piece of wood. "What is SD?" "Shelf D. There are 3 pieces that say SD. They're all part of Shelf D." "How do I know which one goes where?" Liam looked at him with the patience of a person who has explained something perfectly and is waiting for the other person to catch up. "They'll fit in the right order," he said. "You can tell by the shape." Ethan stacked the pieces carefully. He thought about all the things that were like that, things that fit in the right order if you just looked at the shape. Marcus came by on Sunday with a case of beer he knew Ethan wouldn't drink until Liam was asleep and a very good sandwich from the place down the street. And he sat on a box in the middle of the living room and ate his sandwich and looked around at the half-packed apartment. "You good?" he asked. "Getting there." "That's your answer for everything lately." "It's an accurate answer." Ethan sat on the floor, back against the wall. "It's a good opportunity, Marcus. I know you think I'm running." "I think you're doing something that is both a good opportunity and also running," Marcus said. "Those things can be true at the same time." "I know." "Have you talked to her since the contract ended?" "No." Marcus ate his sandwich. He didn't push it, which was one of the things Ethan valued most about Marcus. He said the thing once, and then he let you live with it. "Liam excited?" Liam is cautiously optimistic about the park. High praise. He says the structure looks possibly adequate. Marcus smiled. "That kid," he said. "Yeah," Ethan said. They sat in the half-packed apartment and finished their sandwiches, and Marcus left at 9, and Ethan finished taping boxes until midnight and went to bed on a mattress on the floor because the bed frame was already wrapped. He stared at the ceiling in the particular silence of a nearly empty room and thought about nothing specific for a while, which was what his brain did when it was actually thinking about something specific and trying not to. He thought about what Marcus had said, about the thing being both true at the same time. He thought about whether the fact that you were afraid of something was a good reason not to do it, or a good reason to examine why. He thought about Liam in the school pickup line saying she asks questions like she wants to know the answers, which had been, in its way, the clearest piece of character assessment he'd heard all year. He fell asleep thinking about it and woke up the next morning still not resolved. And then the moving truck came and it stopped mattering what was resolved. Vision. Millhaven in January was gray and specific, not depressing, just particular in the way that winter cities are particular. The sky the color of old concrete, the streets quiet in the early mornings, the light coming later than he was used to. The apartment was on the second floor of a building that was slightly better than the one they'd left, with a landlord who responded to maintenance requests in 4 days, which was worse than his previous landlord but still acceptable. Liam's bedroom was 4 square feet larger. He claimed it with the focused energy of someone staking territory and immediately began organizing it in a system that made sense to him and that Ethan was not going to question. The school was good. This became apparent within the first week when Liam came home with opinions about 2 of his teachers that were the specific kind of opinions a child forms when they've been genuinely engaged rather than managed. One teacher, apparently, had a system for class debate that Liam found architecturally sound. Another had assigned a paper on any topic, and Liam had written about the rules of kickball, specifically whether informal rules could achieve the moral authority of written ones, and the teacher had given him full marks and asked a follow-up question at the bottom in red pen. "What did she ask?" Ethan said. Liam showed him the paper. The question, in neat red handwriting at the bottom, read, "Do you think a rule is only legitimate if everyone agrees to follow it? Or can a rule be legitimate even if some people reject it?" Ethan read it twice. "That's a good question." "I know," Liam said. "I've been thinking about it since yesterday." "What are you thinking?" Liam sat down at their new kitchen table, which was the same table from the old apartment, moved 4 hours north and reassembled in a different room. He put his chin on his hand. I think a rule can be legitimate even if some people reject it, he said slowly, because if you need everyone to agree, then one person can always break a system just by refusing, but he stopped. But, Ethan said, but I think a rule is only good if the people making it actually care what happens to the people following it. He looked at his father. Does that make sense? Ethan looked at his son for a long moment. 8 years old, gap in his front teeth, the flat-pack bookshelf from the old apartment rebuilt in his new room with pieces labeled in a system only he fully understood. 8 years old and working out the conditions under which authority was legitimate. Sitting at a kitchen table 4 hours from the city where they'd been 2 weeks ago, with the equanimity of someone who had absorbed disruption and come out the other side still asking questions. That makes complete sense, Ethan said. Liam nodded, satisfied. I'm going to write that part tomorrow. Ethan made dinner. The kitchen was smaller than the old one, but the refrigerator was bigger, and Liam had already put a new drawing on it. Not a dog this time, a picture of what was, apparently, the possibly adequate park, rendered in the realistic style he'd been developing, complete with the structure in the center that he'd now declared, upon actual inspection, to be genuinely adequate after all. But the old dog drawing was there too, retaped to the left of the new one. He'd brought it. Of course, he'd brought it. 3 weeks into Millhaven, Ethan got a call from Patricia, who ran the working group, to let him know that the documentation framework he'd helped build had been formally adopted into the Whitmore integration process, and that his work had been specifically cited in the implementation report. It was professional news, delivered professionally, and he thanked her professionally and meant it. It was real credit for real work, which was what he'd wanted from the beginning. He did not get a message from Sophia. He told himself this was correct. He told himself it was clean. He had been honest about the decision, she had accepted it, the contract was closed, and 2 adults with complicated situations had handled a complicated situation with more integrity than most complicated situations received. This was a good outcome. He said this to himself several times over the following days in the specific way you say things you believe are true and are trying to also feel. He was at the grocery store on a Saturday morning, Liam beside him with the cart, conducting the weekly argument about whether the cereal with the colored pieces was nutritionally equivalent to the cereal without, when his phone buzzed with a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer. He answered. Ethan. He stopped walking. Liam, sensing something, stopped the cart. It was her voice. Just his name, 2 syllables, but the quality of it was different from anything he'd heard from her before. Not managed, not controlled, not the version she produced for rooms full of people who were watching. The underneath version, the one that had appeared in increments across 3 months, fully present now. Sophia. His voice came out steadier than he expected. How did you get this number? Daniel has a remarkable memory for details he was never supposed to retain, she said. I'm sorry to call like this. Don't be. He moved toward the cereal aisle wall, out of the main flow of foot traffic. What happened? Nothing happened. A pause. I mean, things happened. Gerald resigned from the board last week. The integration framework is being formally adopted. The company is stable. Another pause. Shorter. I'm not calling about any of that. Liam was standing with the cart, looking at him with the careful attention of a child who understands more about a parent's phone calls than the parent realizes. Hold on, Ethan said. He looked at Liam. Can you take the cart to the end of the aisle? I'll be 2 minutes. Liam looked at him. He looked at the phone. He pushed the cart to the end of the aisle without arguing, which was itself a kind of statement. I'm here, Ethan said. I've been trying to figure out the right way to do this for 3 weeks, Sophia said. I keep starting from the business end of it, the practical version, the version where I explain the situation and the options and the reasonable outcomes. And then I realize I'm doing the thing I always do, which is managing the conversation instead of being in it. Sophia, let me finish. Her voice was steady but not easy. I've been in rooms my whole life where I had to be the smartest version of myself and the most composed version and the most strategic version. And I am those things. I'm not going to pretend I'm not. But I have also, in the last 3 months, sat at a kitchen table in an apartment that is not impressive from the outside, and eaten eggs that were slightly overcooked and had a conversation with an 8-year-old about the moral philosophy of kickball. And I want to tell you that those were 3 of the most real hours I have had in years. She paused. I want more of those hours. I want them specifically with you and Liam. And I know that's not a small ask. I know what you moved to Millhaven for, and I know what it cost you, and I am not asking you to undo that. Millhaven is 4 hours, Ethan. 4 hours is not a distance. It is a drive. It is a deliberate choice to get in a car and go somewhere because it matters. And I'm not managing this, I'm just asking whether there is any version of this where you want that too. The grocery store moved around him. Somewhere 2 aisles over, someone was having a disagreement about tomato sauce. The fluorescent lights hummed the way fluorescent lights do. Are you sure? He said. I've been sure for longer than I told you. She said it plainly. I was managing it, and then I stopped. He looked at the end of the aisle. Liam was standing with the cart, examining the nutrition label on a box of cereal with the focused expression he brought to documents he found suspect. 8 years old, gap in his front teeth, working out the conditions under which things were legitimate. I need to tell you something, Ethan said. Okay. When I said I wasn't sure whether I was being practical or afraid, I've been sitting with that since Marcus said it. And the honest answer is that it was both. The math was real. The opportunity was real. And I was also afraid. And I knew I was afraid. And I told myself the math was the reason. He paused. I think that's something you should know before you drive 4 hours. She was quiet for a moment. What were you afraid of? He looked at the ceiling, at the humming lights. That I was the temporary fix, he said. That the contract would end and the board thing would resolve and the sterling thing would go away and you'd look up and there'd just be... He stopped. A man on the 14th floor. Ethan. Her voice was quiet. You fixed a software error that had been broken for years because it bothered you, not because anyone asked. You flagged a merger discrepancy that you could have ignored. You raised a child alone with the kind of steadiness that produces a kid who writes papers on the moral authority of kickball rules. A pause. I have been in rooms with impressive people my entire professional life. Impressive people are common. What you are is not. He stood in the cereal aisle of a grocery store in Millhaven in January, with his son at the end of the aisle looking at nutrition labels, and the feeling he'd spent 3 months refusing to name named itself, quietly and completely, without asking permission. It's a 4-hour drive, he said. I know. The apartment isn't impressive. You said that already, in slightly different words. Liam will ask you questions. I'm counting on it. He almost smiled. When? Tomorrow, she said. If that's okay. He looked at the end of the aisle. Liam had abandoned the nutrition label and was now looking at him directly, with the expression that meant he'd understood the general shape of the phone call even without hearing the other end. Yeah, Ethan said. Tomorrow is okay. He ended the call. He walked to the end of the aisle. He stood next to Liam, who was looking up at him with the patient precision of someone waiting for an accurate answer to an unasked question. That was Sophia, Ethan said. I know, Liam said. She's going to drive up tomorrow. Liam looked at the cereal in his hand. Put it back. Looked at his father. Is she staying? He asked. Not dramatic, just a real question, the way he asked all his questions. I don't know yet, Ethan said, but she's coming. Liam nodded slowly, absorbing this with the equanimity that Ethan had spent years trying to understand the source of. Then he reached past Ethan and took the cereal with the colored pieces off the shelf and put it in the cart. Ethan looked at it, looked at Liam. I'll eat all the other stuff this week, Liam said. But tomorrow I want the good cereal. Ethan looked at the box. He put it back in the cart. Deal, he said. Gipam. She arrived at 11:15 on Sunday morning, which was later than she'd estimated the night before when she'd texted to confirm, which she'd explained was because she'd had to stop for gas, and then because the route she'd taken had been slower than the map suggested. She said this at the door, slightly windswept from the parking lot, holding coffee cups from a place Ethan had never heard of that was apparently an hour and a half from Millhaven and that she'd passed on the way. He looked at her standing in his doorway, the 4-hour drive, the coffee she'd stopped for, the slightly windswept hair. "You drove 4 hours," he said. "I said I would." "You also said 11. The route was slower." She looked at him. "Are you going to let me in?" He stepped back from the door. She came in, and he took one of the coffees because she was holding both, and there was nowhere to put them down immediately, and she looked around the apartment. The new one, smaller kitchen, bigger refrigerator, the flat-pack bookshelf reassembled through Liam's labeling system, the dog drawing and the park drawing side by side on the refrigerator door. She looked at the refrigerator for a long moment. "The dog made the move," she said. "The dog always makes the move," Liam said, appearing from the hallway in his socks and the jeans with the holes in the knees that Ethan had still not thrown out. Sophia looked at him. He looked at her. The same assessment he'd given her the first time, that completely unguarded look of a child who has no investment in managing his own impressions. "You drove a long time," he said. 4 hours, yes." "Did you listen to anything?" "A podcast, and then I turned it off because it was too much talking." Liam nodded. "I do that too," he said. "Sometimes quiet is better." He looked at her coffee. "Did you get one for me?" "Liam," Ethan said. "I'm asking," Liam said, reasonably. Sophia looked at the 2 cups. "I got a hot chocolate, in case." Liam's expression underwent a small but significant shift. "You guessed right," he said. She handed it to him. He took it with both hands, the way he took things he intended to be careful with. He looked at Ethan. "I'm going to finish my paper," he said. "The kitchen is available." He went back down the hallway. Ethan and Sophia stood in the kitchen, in the particular quiet that follows an 8-year-old's deliberate exit, both of them understanding that the exit was deliberate, and that it was, in its way, the most gracious thing Liam knew how to offer. "He made the kitchen available," Sophia said. "He's very considerate." "He's extraordinary." Ethan looked at his coffee cup. "Yeah," he said, "he is." She set her coffee on the counter. She looked at him, the way she'd looked at him in the conference room and in the car and in the grocery store parking lot 4 hours south. The way that was no longer the appraisal look or the management look or even the underneath look. Just her, fully, looking at him. "I'm not here to complicate your life," she said. "I know. I'm here because the alternative was sitting in my apartment knowing I hadn't tried, and I've done a lot of things in my professional life that I'm uncertain about, and a lot of things I'm sure were right, but sitting there not trying..." She stopped. "I couldn't make that be okay." He set his coffee down next to hers. 2 cups on a counter in a kitchen in Millhaven in January, light gray through the window, somewhere down the hall an 8-year-old finishing a paper about legitimate authority. "I need you to understand something," he said, "about what this looks like." "Tell me." "It's 4 hours. It doesn't get shorter. Liam has school and I have a job, and neither of those things bends for weekends. You have a company and a board and a city that needs you in it. Whatever this is, it's not simple, and I've spent enough time in my life pretending things were simpler than they were that I don't have any energy left for it." "I know that." "Do you?" "Because I need to know you understand that I'm not..." He paused, found the actual words. "I'm not going to be good at this. I don't know how to be in your world. I know you taught me some of it, but that was a contract and a context, and this is different. I'm going to say wrong things in rooms full of people who matter to you, and I'm going to show up in the wrong suit sometimes, and I'm not going to have the right answer every time you need someone to have the right answer." She looked at him steadily through all of it. She didn't rush to respond. She thought about it, which was one of the things about her that he had come to value unreasonably. The thinking before the answering. "I need you to understand something too," she said. "I have been surrounded my entire adult life by people who have the right answer. People who know the right room and the right suit and the right thing to say to the right person at the right moment. I could fill a stadium with those people." She paused. "And I called you from a parking lot 4 hours away because you are the only person I've met in years who says the actual thing. Not the managed thing, not the strategic thing, the actual one." She looked at the refrigerator, at the drawings, back at him. "I'm not asking you to be something you're not. I'm asking you to be exactly what you are. That's the part I drove 4 hours for, He stood there in his kitchen in January with the gray light coming through the window and the truth of it settling into him, the way certain truths do. Not dramatic, not sudden, just the slow resolution of something that has been developing for months and finally reaches the clarity it was always moving toward. "I was afraid," he said again. Not as a confession this time, more like a final accurate accounting. "I know," she said. "I'm still a little afraid." "So am I." She said it without drama. "That doesn't go away just because you decide." He looked at her. She looked at him. The 4 hours between their two lives sat in the room with them and was not a wall, exactly. More like a distance you could measure, which meant it was also a distance you could cross. He picked up her coffee cup, handed it to her. She took it. "You want eggs?" he said. She smiled, and this one was fully formed, no hesitation in it. "I want eggs," she said. He made eggs. They were not perfect. He caught the edges of one too long and had to negotiate the middle of another that wasn't entirely set. The usual Saturday imperfections. The ordinary breakfast that existed in real kitchens made by people who were not performing anything. She sat at the table and watched him do it with the attention she brought to things she found genuinely interesting. He talked while he cooked, about Liam's teacher and the kickball paper and the question in red pen at the bottom, about the park that had been upgraded from possibly adequate to genuinely adequate upon inspection. She asked questions, real ones, the kind that meant she was listening to the answers. Liam appeared at 11:55 with his paper in hand and sat down across from Sophia and said, I figured out the legitimacy question." Sophia set down her fork. "Tell me." He told her. The rule can be legitimate even if some people reject it, but only if the people making the rule genuinely care about what happens to the people who have to live under it. Sophia listened to all of it. She asked him what happened when the people in charge stopped caring, and Liam said that was when you had to find ways to change who was in charge, which was hard but necessary, and Sophia said she thought he was right, and Liam said he knew, but he wanted to make sure the logic was solid before he submitted it. "It's solid," she said. "I thought so too," Liam said. He ate his eggs. He looked between the two of them with the quick sideways look he used when he was assessing something. "Are you staying for lunch?" he asked Sophia. She looked at Ethan. He looked at her. "If that's okay," she said. "It's okay," Liam said. He looked at his plate. "I think we have soup." "Soup is good," Sophia said. "It's the kind from a can," Liam said, in the tone of a disclosure he thought was ethically required. "I know what kind of soup it is, Liam," Ethan said. "I'm just saying." Soup is fine," Sophia said. "I'm not here for the soup." Liam looked at her. Something settled in his expression. Not the suspicion released exactly, more like a question he'd been holding answered in a way that satisfied him. He went back to his eggs. The three of them ate in the Millhaven kitchen on a Sunday in January, with gray light through the window and a dog drawing on the refrigerator next to a park that had been upgraded to genuinely adequate, and it was not perfect. The eggs were imperfect. The soup was from a can. The conversation moved in the irregular rhythms of three people still learning the shape of what they were to each other. But imperfect was not the same as wrong, and Ethan had been learning that distinction for 8 years, slowly and at some cost, and he understood it now in a way he hadn't always. There is a particular kind of love that does not arrive fully formed. It does not announce itself with certainty or resolution. It arrives in increments, in the straightening of a crooked tie, in the asking of a second question, in eggs that are slightly overcooked and a hot chocolate in case. It arrives in a child who says the kitchen is available and means it as a gift. It arrives in a 4-hour drive on a Sunday in January. No guarantee of anything except that not trying was worse. Ethan had spent a long time believing that love was the thing that happened to other people in other circumstances. People with less complicated situations, with cleaner slates, with lives that weren't managed month by month and held together with the same deliberate care he put into flat-pack furniture and budgets, and the particular effort of raising a child alone without letting the effort show. He had believed, in the way that worn-down people come to believe things that protect them from disappointment, that a man like him was not the category of person who got the thing he actually wanted, that wanting it was fine, as long as he didn't make the mistake of depending on it. He had been wrong about that. Not in an embarrassing way. in the ordinary human way that people are wrong about the shape of their own lives before they've finished living enough of it to see clearly. What he had learned across 3 months and one crooked tie and a contract that ended cleanly and a 4-hour drive that did not, was that worthiness is not a fixed quantity. It is not something you either have or you don't, something assigned at birth or by salary or by the floor number your desk is on. It is something you demonstrate quietly and persistently in the choices you make when nobody is calculating the cost. In the software errors you flag because they're broken, in the scrapes you clean and the books you read aloud in ridiculous voices in the dark, in the conversations you have honestly when the easier version was available. He had been demonstrating it for years, he just hadn't been watching. 6 months after that Sunday in Millhaven, the flat-pack bookshelf was still labeled in Liam's system, and the dog drawing was still on the refrigerator, and the possibly adequate park had become the genuinely adequate park, and then, over the spring, simply the park, the way things become ordinary when they become beloved. Sophia drove up most weekends that had space for it. There were weekends that didn't have space. The company demanded things. The board required things. The city pulled her in directions that Ethan understood and did not resent because she had never pretended otherwise, and he had never asked her to. She did not pretend the company wasn't real. He did not pretend the distance wasn't real. They managed both with the imperfect, ongoing negotiation of people who have decided that the effort is worth the effort. She was not Liam's mother. She didn't try to be, and Liam didn't ask her to be. And the three of them arrived at something else entirely. A shape that didn't have a clean name, but that functioned, that held, that produced Sunday mornings with slightly imperfect eggs and genuine questions and a kitchen that was always available when it needed to be. Gerald Whitfield had resigned from the board in the aftermath of the confidence vote and moved to a position with a different firm, where Ethan assumed he was still building cases for business decisions that doubled his life decisions, and where someone else was presumably managing the consequences. The Sterling merger had been quietly tabled. The Whitmore integration, completed with the documentation framework that Ethan's working group had built, had gone smoothly enough that Patricia sent him a formal note of appreciation and an informal note that said simply, "Should have promoted you before you left." He had read that one twice and felt the specific, quiet satisfaction of credit that had been earned and arrived late and still meant something. The brake job was done. Had been done since February. The car drove cleanly now, without the particular anxiety of a driver who knows something is wrong and is hoping it holds. One morning in late spring, a Saturday, because Saturday was the day that held most of what mattered, Sophia was in the kitchen looking for something in the cabinet above the refrigerator, and Ethan was putting on his jacket for the school run, even though Liam was standing at the door already with his backpack at the wrong angle, watching both of them with the detached observation of a person who has seen this particular scene before and finds it comfortable. Sophia looked over and said, "Your collar is—" "I know," Ethan said. "You don't know. It's fine." "It's not fine. Come here." He walked over. She fixed his collar with the same practiced, unreflective efficiency she'd brought to the tie in a briefing room on a Tuesday morning 10 months ago. 3 adjustments, smoothed once, done. She looked up. He looked down. The distance between them was the same distance it had been in that elevator reflection, in that conference room, in that small Millhaven kitchen on a Sunday in January. "Better," she said. "Thank you," he said. From the door, Liam said, "That's how it started, right? With a tie?" They both looked at him. "You told me," Liam said reasonably, "a long time ago, that you met because of a tie." Ethan looked at Sophia. She looked at him. Something moved between them that was made of all of it. The briefing room and the contract and the board meeting and the 4-hour drive and the eggs and the soup from a can and the park that had become simply the park. Something that was not simple and had never been simple and that held together anyway, the way things hold together when the people inside them have decided to mean it. "Yeah," Ethan said. "That's how it started." Liam looked satisfied. He opened the door. "We're going to be late," he said, and he was right. And they went. The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator stood with its drawings, the dog, the park, and a new one from last week. A picture of three figures at a table that Liam had drawn with the offhanded confidence of a child depicting something ordinary, the way you draw the things that have become yours. Outside, the spring morning was doing what spring mornings do. Imperfect, a little cold still. The sky the kind of blue that is genuinely blue and not performing it. They walked to the car together, the three of them, not holding hands or making gestures, just moving through the same morning, choosing the same direction. That was all. That was enough. That was, as it turned out, precisely what enough looks like from the inside. Not grand and not resolved in any final way, just true, and continuing and chosen again each day by people who understand that love is not a thing that happens to you. It is a thing you decide to do, and keep deciding, and do again tomorrow.